Hello everyone, welcome to Series 4 of the GBA Lightbulb Sessions. The Great British Entrepreneur Awards, in association with BT Skills for Tomorrow, have designed a free live stream series of Lightbulb Sessions to support small businesses and entrepreneurs with insightful and advice-driven sessions, featuring some of the UK's brilliant entrepreneurial minds to illuminate your path to entrepreneurial success. You can find out more about BT Skills for Tomorrow by heading to their website at www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow, or by clicking on the link in the comment section. In today's session, Natasha Frankos, Head of Corporate haysmacintyre, will chat with JP Then, founder of Slurp, and Bobby Stockley, CEO of Sophia Webster, to discuss how the reopening of high streets has impacted retailers and e-commerce businesses. JP and Bobby will talk through the impacts the closures caused to their own businesses, as well as their expectations for the future of high streets e-commerce and sales mix. There is an opportunity to ask questions during this session. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these throughout the session. Please note that there will be a poll towards the end of the session, and all answers will be anonymous. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Natasha.
Thanks very much, Chloe, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to explore this topic with Bobby and JP. Before diving into the questions, I thought I'd just ask each of our brilliant panelists to just give us a few minutes intro about them and their business. Bobby, I don't know if you'd like to go first.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for having me today. My name's Bobby. I'm an engineer originally by trade. I'm an entrepreneur in the true sense, as I've been sort of self-employed since the turn of this century, so about 20 years, showing my age now. Made lots of mistakes. Remember the 2008 financial crisis with my small business, and I was lucky enough to meet my now wife Sophia in 2010 as she was completing her MA at the Royal College of Art. Soph had this vision for her company, which I used to hear a lot about what it was going to be and who was going to wear the shoes from that. Seemed like a dream at the time, but she, true to her word, she started a company in 2012. I got roped in, I helped, I had two key skills. I was free and I could help pay for things. So I was sort of team member number 3 back in 2013. And since then, we've gone on to be hopefully a recognised, really creative brand selling luxury shoes and accessories.
Thank you. JP?
Hi everyone, I'm JP. I've lived in London now for almost 12 years. I was actually born in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I grew up in Australia, so I'm clearly a Scottish Australian if you hadn't noticed. Back in 16 years ago, I started my career in economics in Australia and realised that I didn't really want to look at spreadsheets all day. Similar to Bobby, that was at the financial crisis, so there was a lot of learnings there. So I picked myself up and moved over to London and really made a concerted effort to get into something more creative and use both sides of my brain. I guess you could say I found my feet about 8 years ago, where I co-founded a company called Crosstown. And Crosstown is a London-based brand that is a bakery, and it's quite well known for its donuts, ice creams, and cookies. And we invented the sourdough donut. You might recognize it with a little cross on it. Off the back of that, I realized there was a big opportunity to help hospitality businesses with e-commerce. So back in 2016, I started another company called Slurp, and that launched to market in 2019, so only a year and a half ago, and has been helping hospitality brands, big and small, sell direct to customers. So we essentially help power people's websites and allow customers to buy direct from their favorite brands for things like hot meals, as well as meal kits all across the UK.
Thank you. And finally, as Chloe said, I head up the corporate team at haysmacintyre. We're a firm of chartered accountants and tax advisors, and we specialise in supporting changing, fast-growing businesses and their founders across a range of services, whether that's outsourced accounting, audit, corporate tax, international expansion, R&D or share options, and a whole host of other specialist tax services. And the bit that I love is that we're often there for the journey through the scale and often onto some sort of exit event for the founders and their team. Right, so I have some questions for the panel and about their views about the evolving state of the high street and how the opening up of retail is impacting e-commerce. There is a chat box, so please do ask questions as we go, and I'm going to try and weave them into the conversation. It's really important that you get as much out of the session as you need, and so we want to answer your questions as we go. Before we dive into the questions, I thought I'd set the scene with what I've read that's happening on the high street. So UK online sales grew by 36.6% in 2020, while in-store sales of non-food items declined by 24%. Footfall across all retail location types in May 2021 was down a significant 27.7% on the same month in 2019. But positively, there has been a steady and consistent improvement in footfall with each passing month as things are opening up. So is that cause to be cautiously optimistic about the future of the high street? It does seem to have impacted online sales, online retail sales, because the ONS has reported that there has been a 5.6 month-on-month decline in online retail sales for April 21. Bobby and JP, have you seen an impact of the reopening of the high street on e-commerce in either of your own businesses or from your knowledge of others in the industry?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. I guess from a hospitality lens, right? So because Slurp is powering hospitality brands, and because of Crosstown being a hospitality business, food has gone through, I'd say, a very volatile period, the last 18 months, stating the obvious. And this transitionary phase as we come out of lockdown, or hopefully come out of lockdown, is quite volatile, and there's a lot of moving parts and challenges in the sector. I think that channel mix between in-premise and online has been almost like a wave, constantly changing as we come in and out of lockdown. The interesting point that I'd like to make is that I think that it's been driven through consumer habits. So what it has done for the sector is that it's opened up and accelerated what was already occurring, which was this digitalization of the hospitality sector and people ordering online more. That's just come ahead, years and compared to some of the forecasts. And really what we're seeing is that those consumer habits are here to stay. Yeah. So people who've started adopting and ordering online for the first time, maybe, they're keeping up that habit and they're repeating it. And it's been met by the market, been met by these hospitality brands who are actually building their offering for online menus, which is really interesting. So we're seeing product development, innovation for people developing their online offering as much as their in-premise offering. And they may be completely different. They might have a finish at home meal kit that they've never done before, and they're now sending that across the UK, and they're based in London. People were not thinking about expanding and reaching a customer base so broad from just their local street. So I think that's been a significant change. And as we see the reopening of the high street, we're still seeing people wanting to order online and dine at home. So yeah, it's a very interesting time, but an exciting time, I think, for the sector in many senses as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bringing with it new revenue streams, it seems like, as well. What I love about this panel is the fact that we've got the hospitality aspect and the retail perspective as well. And there will be a lot of crossover, but also differences in those industries. So, Bob, it'd be great to hear your view of what's happening, because I think the retail and fashion industry was already on a bit of a transition, but it was slower. And obviously the pandemic's accelerated that. How have you seen that play out in Sophia Webster?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear from JP, because I think at a very high level, these behaviours, we're seeing a transition in behaviour. And I think even travelling to stores, travelling to work, instead of us sitting in a location today on this panel, we're doing it over the internet. And I think it's this acceleration of behaviour change that I think is really we're gonna look back on, and it was a transition. I think I can only speak for our business, and we're by no means perfect, but we were biased towards online. And I think that was just based on our product is hopefully really imaginative, but we're not trying to sell to everybody in a location. It's not a convenience thing. And really looking at what's the smallest viable audience globally. So actually we can be quite a nice sized business by being quite exclusive, but global, rather than, you know, London is definitely a big market, but do we need to focus on one market? How do we keep stock? It's so much more efficient for us to trade online. And I think the acceleration has been, people have been forced to try it. And with lots of businesses, it is just much more efficient. So I can really relate to that behavior change piece. I think restores, we only had a couple of locations pre-lockdown, but obviously we sell to wholesale partners, and we're definitely seeing an uptick since things have been opened up, and even online. I think it's just because people are looking forward to going out again. They've not done much for a long time, and they're spending. But I think really, you know, for me, thinking about the future of stores, it's what do they do best? Are they the best places to hold stock? You know, I think it's just really rethinking through the efficiencies and what the stores are best for. Because, you know, for our business, we've got maybe 10, 15,000 people a day visiting the website. We might have 5, 10 people coming into store. And as a relatively small business, what this pause has given me a chance to do is just really reflect and go, actually, what's the correct ratio for my resources? And definitely need to meet people on a really qualitative level and understand why they love the brand, or, you know, things on fit and all these great things that you get by speaking to people. We can't do without that, but it's just from a resource point of view. If I need to have 3 or 4 people in one location serving potentially 10 customers on a day, I've probably only got a few more people trying to deal with a high level of transactions and interactions throughout the globe. So for me, it just gave us an opportunity to go back to first principles and think, how do we serve our customer best? What's most efficient? How, you know, from an impact reduction point of view as well, moving products and storing things, that being centralized for us is a much more efficient model. So I think there's the piece about behavior change. And I think there's a piece where for many businesses, you know, my barber, hairdresser, online's probably not going to work for him, but I think it's just going back to going, what's the purpose of the business and how best you serve your customer? And I think for the ones where, you know, that real one-to-one experience wins, that's going to completely make sense. But actually for a lot of businesses, the move to online, I don't think we're going to go back to where we were with the high streets from a behavior point of view as they were.
No. But there's obviously still a place for the store, right? And you sort of said, you've got to businesses need to think about, right, well, how do we utilize our store, and where does that fit in the strategic plan of what we want to get out of this?
And actually, that's a really good point, because I was obsessed a couple of years ago with virtual selling. So using the store and being able to do Instagram lives and this type of things. And that's where I really think about JP's business, about how he's, you know, expanded the reach of what's normally something that's a convenience piece. And people just weren't ready for it. And actually coming out of this, you know, if we have a location where we've built this world, so it's a great display for the brand, we've got all the product there, you know, a customer wants to actually know a measurement of a shoe, we can put it off the shelf. So I think there's lots of things that the store can really add value for, but as a place to hold a lot of stock and transact and try and ask people to travel an hour to get there or longer is not its strength.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point there. I mean, for hospitality, I think we could all relate and say that we all still go to restaurants. We all still want to dine out, right? There's a huge pent-up demand at the moment for people having those experiences and sharing them. With the flip side that there are, you know, really strong demand coming from customers who won't go on premise, who might not naturally live in that area. And I think that's the interesting part, is that, you know, with my Crosstown hat on, which Crosstown's a London-based business, it's got over 20 sites across London and Cambridge. It's always going to be a in-premise and online model. That is the omni-channel model for a business like Crosstown. and you can't take away the experience of coming in and you know, the senses of smelling and you know, seeing the product and having that coffee made for you. That will never go away. But what has changed is how we look at where we will open. You know, we're traditionally a very central London-based business that has been guided by where there are offices and where there's density. So we've got, you know, a couple of shops in the City of London. It's very, very quiet there at the moment. So reevaluating sites like that and saying, well, actually, are we better off going into more of a residential area to capture that market and give that experience? That's something that's definitely been learnt in the last 18 months and gives us a different viewpoint as to how we might grow into the future.
No, absolutely. Good point. And there is a question that's come in actually on this topic. It's for Bobby. And have you considered making the store a place to see every line in every colour, in every size, but delivered to a customer's home once they've bought it? So then there's no risk of the product, well, or reduced risk of the product being returned.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion, and I think it's that way of really thinking about sort of resetting and going back to, you know, what can the store do really well. And I was sort of reflecting on what I just said about stock holding as well. Yeah. Actually, a London store with a London market is a good place for same-day delivery potentially from a stock holding point of view. But it's thinking about JP's point, it's just how does that work in the new world? How does it work? You know, thinking about we were very precise on locations when we were looking at stores in the past based on a heritage or a history of what works well, even a certain side of a road. And I think to JP's point and to the question's point, actually that locality in the new world might be quite different. But yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And click and collect is another thing. You know, you've discovered something online, it's on your commute, you're in work that one day, actually, rather than part with the money, you want to come in and try it on. And you might take the other. So sort of doing things at your convenience is another opportunity. But yeah, I think this is the way, and I think this is what we love. You know, this is why we're in this, is to try and hopefully think about a new, better way. And we'll be the ones that test these things out and probably fail, but it's information in the market, and we'll error correct and get it right. So I think we've got some good entrepreneurs by the sounds of it in the audience thinking ahead. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And JP, you sort of mentioned that Slurp, you came back up with the idea in 2016. Did the pandemic impact how you launched it or the strategy of that business?
I think, well, as you highlight, this is a business that was thought of in 2015 and then officially started in 2016. So it's a good sort of 5 years old. And I think at the time, I was just trying to solve Crosstown's problem. It was really, really built from my experience. It was, hey, look, we've adopted marketplace technology very early. So Crosstown's been quite progressive in its adoption of technologies, and we were one of the first brands to use Deliveroo, and we were launch partners with Uber Eats. And my learning was relatively simple. We wanted to have more control as a brand, and customers were telling us they wanted to order from us. So we didn't want to be restricted by essentially a middleman that sat between Crosstown and the end customer, and we couldn't find a solution out there that was suitable for hospitality. So long story short, that led to us creating Slurp. So I think that was already occurring 5 years ago. And what the pandemic is done, going back to your question, is just accelerated and put at the forefront to particularly the restaurants and the brands mindset that they do need to have an omni-channel strategy that's not just dependent on dine-in in a marketplace. They need another pillar to their business. And that's the big fundamental change that's happened, is that I think hospitality now as a sector is looking at their businesses going, okay, we've had dine-in, we've had delivery through marketplaces, there's probably a third pillar here, which is direct to consumer e-commerce, and delivering that experience directly, and actually engaging and very simply providing that hospitable service online as much as in premise. With the hospitality sector, that's what we should be able to do. I think just going back to Bobby's point, it's really interesting you mentioning click and collect and sort of getting people the product delivered quite quickly. Those are all learnings that are happening in the hospitality sector. There's a lot of cross-pollination between food and retail that will occur, because ultimately, when you've got bricks and mortar sites, you have the same costs and overheads to run that business. And if there's a way that you can make that store work harder, it should be explored. And even the way that we define shops now across town, we used to call them shops and stores. We now call them hubs. So because they're now actually servicing not just the walk-in customers, but actually a delivery area and delivery catchment to a broader area. And I think that will happen in retail as well. And that will probably influence the shaping of the high street to some degree.
And you've spoken briefly about, obviously these different revenue streams. Does that therefore mean businesses need to think about, well, who is the customer that's buying each of those revenue streams? And do I need to do something differently for each of those consumers if they are different?
I think so. I mean, you've always got to listen to the customer, right? And that's where a lot of the innovation comes from, is actually just listening and hearing, okay, customers now want to buy crosstown donuts for their wedding. Maybe there's a big catering segment in there. And thinking back, when we first started, was weddings on the radar for crosstown? No, it wasn't. But now actually it's a big part of our business. So I think a lot of the drive for change and progression that happens in a brand comes from literally listening to your customer base and hearing what they want and trying to meet the market with a solution. I think more specifically for hospitality, one of the interesting things that's come out of it, and we did a study very recently asking the market as to what they want, asking customers what do they want to see in the future. And 9 out of 10 people surveyed want their favorite brands to be doing delivery to their homes and to continue that post reopening. That's a huge insight, right? And I think that stat has gone upwards massively over the last 18 months. The other interesting thing is the adoption of technology by the older demographic. We're seeing more people order online who traditionally might have not have done that before because they've had to. So now that they've tried that, they are going, okay, actually, I can just go online and order something for the weekend or for Friday night, whereas they previously would have never thought about doing that.
Yeah. And Bobby, you spoke about, the increase of online has sort of expanded your reach in terms of new customer bases across, cross-border. Have you therefore had to think about what you're doing for each of the new profile of those customers that this increase in eComm has sort of opened up to you?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, for us pre-COVID, it was, probably our biggest market is the US. So we were already being pulled in that direction. Sorry, Tash, could you just repeat the question for me?
Yeah, I was going to say, are you finding that you're having to do different things for the new customers that e-commerce has brought to you? So in terms of how you engage with them, if they are, because you spoke about your increasing your international footprint, that's easier to increase your footprint internationally because of the increase in e-com.
Yeah, I think the big thing that's changed for us is just really thinking about the quality of the service online, because being a business, when we first started, just naturally you fall into following opportunities. So wholesale was a big, we were 100% wholesale. We launched an e-commerce site that grew. Oh, we transact, people click and buy. Oh, actually, what's the customer experience like? And that starts to really grow. And for us, that's really tipped over in the period of the pandemic, because actually it's just a case of going, it's that, detach, look from the outside in, and it's actually how do we make our online customer experience that on a par with walking into the store. And it's been a real focus to, I think, to JP's point, putting the customer first and just trying to, you know, it's not just an online anonymous transaction. Oh, it is if you want it to be, but actually, how do you connect? You know, live chat. I think that the timeframes people expect responses in. I think from a delivery point of view, I think people have been really realistic with, you know, logistical issues over the pandemic, but it's the expectation now is high of service and everything online. And I think that's just become, you know, we've gone from being a designer brand that sort of tries to bring pieces of art on shoes to life to actually we're becoming hopefully a customer experience brand of how we serve our customers. And that's been the big shift for me, that I think it would have come about, but it just, you have these moments where it becomes crystal clear. So that's been the big change.
Okay, thank you for that. And we've got lots of questions, so I'm going to start working my way through some of these. Okay, so with physical retail sales declining and brands leaving the high street, do you think, I guess this is one for JP, restaurants and other hospitality businesses will start taking over the high street? So I guess this comes to, right, what do you think the future high street will look like?
Yeah, I think, like, what landlords do with their vacant sites is a big question. And what we've seen in the hospitality sector in terms of innovation is experiential concepts, which generally take bigger footprints. They're almost like a modern day food hall in many senses. And we've seen quite a lot of them pop up in London, where they've taken, probably the most relevant is the old BHS store in Oxford Street, which got taken over by one of the, I can't remember the name of the operator, but they essentially built a modern day food court, which has got, you know, a bar. It's got all these independent, you know, street food vendors that have set up stall there, and it's got music. You know, that's quite a good example of how the high street's innovated and changed. Interestingly, the other side of the BHS store was taken over by an experiential concept called Swingers, which does golf and food. And yeah, exactly. So that's quite interesting to see concepts like that evolve. Obviously, there can only be so many of them. It can't take up the whole high street. But what I think you're seeing in the market is really this almost a two-sided race, where you've got traditional brands like call it the Pretz of the world, who are trying to innovate and get ahead of the game now, but are starting from quite a traditional base. They've been very dominant in just being walk-in only. And then you've got these new brands that have got no legacy issues, that are coming into the sector with a very omni-channel approach. And they're looking at it going, okay, well, how do we be digitally enabled from day one? And that sort of two sides of race, as one's playing catch up, one's already ahead of the game, is interesting. What that means for the high street, you know, I'll be lying if I said I knew what would happen, but I think it's an opportunity for a reset in many senses, an opportunity for new concepts to come to the forefront, and that's only benefits the end consumer, right? Only benefits people like us who want to experience new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And a related question that's come in is, and I guess this is one for, well, both of you really, but do you think we're going to see a bit more dynamic use of physical space, i.e. or e.g. increased use of pop-ups, for example? I don't know, Bobby, whether that you've got pop-ups in your strategy, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think so, because I think exactly to JP's point, experiences, that's hard to replicate online. You know, it can be done to a certain degree, but for us, our store currently, bridal appointments, there's an event, you meet up, you try, you know, get your bride's sort of the wedding party shoes. That's a really nice thing that, you know, hopefully people look forward to come and enjoying that experience. And these are the things we still want to do. So I think the beauty for me of pop-ups is that instead of us having this fixed location in or two locations in London, actually let's go around the UK and let's meet some other customers. and get to know, you know, the trends and the people, and interact on that level. So yeah, it's just a better way to get to know those customers in those regions, rather than sort of a data collect. So
I
yeah,
totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. I mean, a great example is Crosstown did a pop-up recently in Cambridge, because we felt that, well, one, we used Schlepp's data to realize that people were buying our donuts there and we were delivering there. So it's like, okay, there's a captive audience there from what we can see. We did a pop-up within a premise for, I think it was 3 or 4 months, and it went well. So we're now opening a permanent site there. So I think using pop-ups as almost a proof of concept is quite an interesting idea. And when I think back to Crosstown's early days, you know, we started as a market stall and we evolved into retail. And the first site that we had was in Piccadilly Circus Station, and it was a pop-up. It was for 6 months. And the whole reason we took that site was, can we stop traffic with our donuts to serve coffee? And it validated that point. And then we basically, as soon as we had enough proof point of trade to go, okay, this works, we went upstairs and tried to find a permanent site in Soho. And that was our first shop. So I feel like pop-ups are a great way to test the market. And it's, without a doubt, there's not a time better than now to find a pop-up space, because there will be an abundance of opportunity to do that. So I think it's really interesting to see what will happen in the coming 12 months with certain sites and areas, and how they evolve.
Okay, thank you for that. And have either of you seen different trends within different sized locations? So I guess we're talking about repurposing your stores, you know, and they're actually hubs now. So we're servicing a number of things out of those sites. Have you seen a trend in the size of the locations?
I mean, Crosstown traditionally takes quite small sites because it doesn't have to do much there, right? We have a central bakery in Battersea in London, and then every morning those products go out to the retail sites and they're sold, and that happens every day, 365 days a year. Of course, we've been impacted by the sites that have been in worker population areas, so places like the Canary Wharfs, the City of London, even the Soho areas. They've had limited footfall. There isn't really the workers back, there isn't the tourists. So of course we've been impacted by that. But on the flip side, we've seen significant growth in e-commerce. So although these people aren't coming to the shops, they've been buying online and getting deliveries to their homes. So I think it's, you know, will the format of a retail shop change for Crosstown? Not necessarily, but we'll just be more selective about where we go.
Yeah, okay. And Bobby, would you say the same? Have you rethought? Because I know you had a smaller site, and then obviously the Sloane Street site is bigger.
Yeah. So what I would say for me, and I think thinking about trend and behaviour, fixed physical costs for me, I'm a bit cautious of. And I think if we really zoom out and look at Airbnb's value, you know, it's probably not doing particularly well in this moment, but the value compared to Hilton Hotels or a brand that's been in the space, and how that grew with virtual assets essentially, and not having the fixed costs of the location. So we've seen this trend in many areas. So with things changing so rapidly, having a long fixed, you know, size of space, there's a lot of space. You could probably get a bigger space, but I think just thinking about having agility going into the future with a very uncertain time. So in my head would be efficiency. It's probably the engineer coming out of me. But I do think from the pop-up point of view, actually, where there are these bigger spaces, I think there's an opportunity for collaboration of brands joining up or creating small ecosystems. I'm thinking Crosstown Donuts, and, you know, come in, get your coffee and look at this, you know, and you've probably got 3 or 4 brands cross-pollinating customers. Because what we don't want to lose, we want to be efficient, you know, we want to be more productive. We want to serve the customer better, but we still need connection. So I think it's the future becomes the store becomes more about connection. So I think, yeah, size of space, I think there will be opportunities with bigger spaces. I think how they could be shared, how that could be shared rather than us being, we want our own location, and it's more like we want to share this space and have our own, our own area and create football and create an experience where people can explore, different brands. So I think there's, I don't know if I've answered that very clearly, but
no,
yeah.
you have, and it chimes with the sort of food market hall concept that JP touched upon. I love the idea of you collaborating with your brands. Okay, so we've got some more questions. Okay, this is a good one. If you had to start your business again from scratch, what would be your 3 main priorities? What would you change from what you initially did with your experience now?
Have we got another hour?
I know. Right, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe just go for one thing. I don't know.
I think it's a very good question, and it does need some thought. But I think if I think back to the start of Slurp, actually, I'll go to Crosstown first because it makes more sense. Sorry to jump. When I did the business plan for Crosstown, I spent a good 6 months doing it and immersed myself in all things donuts and coffee and brand, and did all the forecasts and pulled the brand together and did projections and all these things. And what actually happened in the first year at Crosstown was we started as a market stall on the lane in Farringdon. And we're very lucky that in the second week, a food buyer from Selfridges was on the street, walked past and engaged with me and started talking about, what are you doing? And I didn't know who this person was, of course. And that led to a meeting at Selfridges. And a month later, we were on the shelves in the bakery of the Selfridges food hall as the first brand that they brought in externally. And I think you can't plan for that, right? I'm not saying there's an element of luck, of course, but the whole business plan was themed around us opening up our own markets, going into retail, of course, with the view of being omnichannel in the future. But it didn't mention the word wholesale. And after the first year, we were predominantly a wholesale business. That's how we got the brand name out there. We started selling to all these positional cafes across London and ended up having a fleet of drivers and going out in the morning, delivering all our donuts to people. So I think the learning in that was you've got to be really nimble at the start. And if we were resistant to it, we wouldn't have had that opportunity to get the reach and get the brand name out there. So I think, although at the start I might have been quite set in my ways of being like, I've got to do it this way, I've planned this out, I've got a business plan that's taken me 6 months, it's got all the bells and whistles, we were actually really flexible on how we went to market. And that was really, really, really important. We were definitely certain on how the brand would be perceived and how it would look and feel, and the product quality. And we didn't change on that, we didn't compromise on that. But we were very nimble in terms of how we actually grew in the first 12 and 24 months, which was really, really important. So I think that's, call it a learning or mistake, or just a mindset and a bit of advice as to how you approach a small business is be willing to change direction, be willing to deviate from what you think is the path, because you're almost certainly going to have to. And you can never forecast too far into the future.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. Bobby, what's your words of wisdom? What would you do differently?
Really good ones there, JP. So completely agree, growth mindset. It's, you have to stay agile. But for me, I think, and it's good today because you're talking to JP, you reflect on when you start the business and don't forget why you started your business. Don't forget that passion. Don't forget to enjoy it, because quite often you look back, you're always aiming for these goals and you're never really anywhere. And it sounds corny, but it's enjoy the journey. And I think the thing I would definitely change is really think about relationships, because, you know, it's difficult in business. You work with friends. We've never done it before. I've probably hired 100 people in the last 8 years, and it's difficult working with people. But I think if you really get to know your values very early on, understand their values, and make sure there's a good alignment there, because it's really challenging. So really putting a lot of time and energy into relationships, and actually probably thinking about values and ability sometimes before skills and experience, because skills and experience you can grow, but actually if you've got different values to people, they're never going to change.
Yeah, completely. I think when hiring is one of the toughest things in growing a business. I think we can all relate to that, and finding people that buy into the vision and having the right mindset. And I think one thing that I learned after a few relatively large mistakes was trust my gut. My gut doesn't really lie very often. And I made some decisions that on paper made a lot of sense. And, you know, they were validated, but I didn't feel right about them, but I still did them anyway. And I regret doing that. So I think, you know, being bold enough to trust your gut and trust yourself when you need to is a really important one.
That's a really good point, JP, because I remember when we first started, it was like, right, when we get to this point, we're going to get these experts in.
Yeah.
You know, oh, they know what they're doing, we'll get them in. Actually, the only thing that's special about your brand is the energy, the belief, and the unique differentiation that you bring to the marketplace. And sometimes these great people that have great skills and great experience with a smaller company, you just can never assume, you know.
Yeah, I have to say, because obviously I have lots of clients that have scaled, and I've seen go through that transition where they've maybe taken external investment, and then at that point they think, right, we need to get in this management layer of all these people that have come from the industry with fantastic CVs, and then they come in and then it just causes turmoil. There's not a good fit of culture to the business, and you know, you just think, actually, you did this yourselves, you built it to this point, and of course you will need some external counsel as you go, but don't lose sight of what you've got so far and your own abilities as well. So I've definitely seen that as a theme.
Well, one really quick thing as well, Tash, there's no rush. It's like in this day and age, it's like rush next year, where are we going to be, how are we going to grow? And for me, what's really sat with me recently is slow is fast in the long run.
Yeah, and don't always compare yourself to what you think are your competitors. Just stay on your path and get on with it. And you can get stuck in a game of just comparison, and there's always someone who's going to be better, faster, you know, whatever it is that you want to compare yourself on. It doesn't get you anywhere. It really doesn't. I think just stay true to what you're doing. It's a really good point about, you know, slow is fast, because it is a long journey. You know, these are businesses that have taken years to build up. Crosstown's 8 years old, and I still feel it's the start. You know, it's got a huge future ahead of it. Slow the same, it's 5 years old, but we're very much an early stage tech startup. So I think it's don't think that go into this thinking there's a quick result. I think it's going to take a lot of time to build something amazing.
Yeah, very, very valuable advice. We have got to the end of our time. There are a couple of more questions. I'll just see if we can do maybe a couple more, and then maybe we'll wrap up. So in the early stages, did you chase sales or profit? Do you feel sales create value or profit? It's an interesting one, isn't it? Do you chase the top line, or do you,
I think initially, naturally, you need sales to have a reasonable profit number. And I think there's a dichotomy there that needs to be, you know, it's never the perfect balance, and it goes between the two. But I think, and I think it's another good thing. You need different skills at different times. When you first start, you need some customers.
Sure.
You know, you need sales. And then actually, I think it's just being able to detach and reflect and go, you know, how defensible are we? How profitable are we? What are we chasing growth for? What's that, you know, what's on the horizon? Why are we doing it? That'd be my point.
you know?
Yeah, definitely. You need customers and you need to establish your brand. That's the focal point for any early stage business, is get the brand presence out there, make the till ring. That's the most important thing, because without it, you don't have a business. And of course, profits come at a point where you feel you can focus on it and you can drive efficiencies. Very different for tech. It's very much top line and profits, as you probably know. A lot of tech companies don't make any money. It's all about capturing the market. So yeah, it's sales foremost, without a doubt.
And profit is really, I think it's a good point, JP, because I think we look at money being pumped into businesses these days, and it's almost, there was a trend, I think, pre-COVID where profit wasn't important, and you're competing with these massive companies online that are huge marketplaces, and actually for smaller businesses, profit but also cash is another.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Cash is king, isn't it? You know, absolutely. And you know, there's the vanity that comes, of course, with growing your turnover to a certain level. But I think the business gets to a point where then you, like you say, you need to assess the quality of that revenue, and you know, where you're thinking about, have I got my mix right? Am I too reliant on wholesale at a terrible margin? You know, because that won't be sustainable, as you say. Okay. Oh, we've overrun. So, but we have had a brilliant session, and actually we could just go on, couldn't we? It's so good. So thank you so much. Chloe, I know you're going to do a little bit of a wrap up.
Yes, thank you so much, Bobby, JP and Tash. It's been great to have you with us. Before we finish the session, please can we have one key takeaway from you each?
You first, Bobby.
Me first. I think my one, probably just reinforcing the point, but talking to JP today has been a really nice reflection for me to see someone that's passionate about their business, and it's thinking about Sophia and myself, and you know, why do we do this? You know, and I think it's just never forget, you know, why you're in this, and enjoy that process, because it's going to be tough at times, but we probably wouldn't want it any other way. We'd probably get bored. So yeah. Enjoy it.
I think mine would be remain nimble, and Bobby's point is agile. It's really important. You have to be able to react, and that's so important in the early stages of a business and establishing yourself. So you might be set in a direction, just be willing to turn left or right.
And my one is quite similar to that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Test something, test a concept. You know, it might work, it might not, but be bold and take the step of testing it. And then if it doesn't work, you just do something different. But at least you're then able to make an informed decision on which direction to take.
Amazing. Thank you very much to all three of you. The Lightbulb sessions will be back in September for more advice-driven sessions. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of this recording later on today. And you can find the replay at www.lightbulb-sessions.haysummit.com. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, JP, Bobby and Tash.
Thanks everyone.